Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-09-24. Story 1, The Puppet in the Tree. Every elementary school has a ridiculous urban legend. My school had Muppet Man, and I hated him. Muppet Man was deformed. Ill-fated plastic surgery left him with the ghastly proportions of a marionette puppet, so he stole a rainbow animal costume from the school theater and wore it everywhere. He lived in an ancient oak tree in the recess yard. Some kids claimed he lived in the branches, watching us play from camouflaged hideouts of leaves and twigs. The morbid kids said he lived in the trunk, eating caterpillar larvae and torturing the ghost of Jason Hughes. Jason Hughes wasn't an urban legend, unfortunately. He was just a tragedy. A doomed, anxious wreck cursed with ridiculously outsized glasses and an obsession with drawing. I remember feeling angry one rainy afternoon because I wanted to color with the teacher's new markers, but Jason already used all the paper in the classroom. Nobody liked him much, including me. But I don't know why. He was a sweet kid. Fretful, anxious, and too smart for his own good, but sweet. Jason disappeared on a November evening in second grade. A few days later a teacher found his clothes piled at the base of the schoolyard oak tree. The principal called a school assembly to make the announcement. He made it sound like the clothes had been laundered and neatly folded, but my dad, a cop at the time, a cop with the bad habit of telling his kids things nobody should have to know, told me Jason's clothes were filthy. Worse than filthy, in fact, matted with urine, feces, and blood. He told me I couldn't repeat it to anybody. I never did. It was too horrifying to even think about, let alone share. That's why I hated Muppet Man. Nobody could say his name without some snot-nosed little shit from behind the tracks saying Jason's. A horrifying schoolyard litany. That was another problem. The kids at school knew Jason was my neighbor, and they knew my dad was a cop. After weeks of hysterical interest, I was abruptly ostracized. It suited me fine. Over the past couple years, my dad had arrested the parents of at least 2 kids in my class, and they gave me hell for it. It was all right. I preferred books to people anyway and spent every recess reading under the oak tree. Sometimes I pretended to read to Jason's ghost. Penance, I guess, for treating him so poorly. One day in February I got to school 2 or 3 hours late. I don't remember why. I only remember getting to school and plodding across the empty recess yard. February is a bad month in that particular corner of the world. The sky goes from polished steel in the morning to icy steel in the evening, and at night dims to a flat watery darkness that makes my heart ache. The plants are all dead, the trees skeletal except for flourishing colonies of mistletoe. It looks like despair. The empty recess yard was no exception. Everything was grey and pale and somehow brittle, like it would crack and shatter if you touched it. The almost preternatural stillness turned that pale winter fragility into something sinister. Paranoia swirled through me suddenly. What if, just what if, it was true? What if the universe was broken? What if the scene before me was a fragile husk, just waiting for a misplaced step to break it into pieces? I swallowed a surge of panic and took extra care with each step, setting my foot down with excruciating gentleness. Sand crunched under my soles. Everything felt solid, but the sense of glassy fragility persisted. I fought the urge to close my eyes and walked as quickly as I dared. My path took me right past the oak tree. Black, blown glass bark glimmered faintly. Branches threw spider-web patterns against the grim sky. They were bare except for nests of mistletoe. The tree was infested with it. Suddenly, with a disconcerting, painfully adult burst of clarity, it occurred to me. The tree was dying. I slowed to a halt, staring at it with the kind of hushed reverence you're supposed to feel in church. The tree was scary but beautiful at the same time. More than that, it was a pillar of my memory. It was visible from my backyard, towering over the school and my childhood like a reassuring and eternal sentry. Except it wasn't eternal. It would be gone someday, maybe before I left grade school, maybe sooner. My throat felt hot and tight. I took in the sight of the bare branches and tried to mentally edit out the mistletoe clusters. It was difficult, they burst from the tree thicker than summertime leaves, and they kept moving, jostled, no doubt, by the cold winter wind. Except, another brutal, bleak epiphany, there was no wind. The dark mistletoe rustled and writhed like a trapped serpent. Cold air stung my eyes as they widened. Bright bursts of color flickered inexplicably among the branches, slithering through the mistletoe like a multicolored feather boa. And glittering in that sinuous rope of color, eyes. Glassy round eyes the color of limes. The rope of color broke into tendrils and grew, not unlike the fungus in which it nested, overtaking the darkness with eye-wateringly vibrant neon hues. Then they twined back together, worming behind branches and mistletoe before resolving into a fluffy, ridiculously proportioned caricature of an animal. A cartoon incarnate. A Muppet hello, it said. Its voice made me jump, full and hearty and unpleasantly friendly. A cartoon voice. My lip trembled. Tears pricked my eyes, scorching and frigid at once. You're not real. Yes, I am. It fixed me with a sharp, reptilian stare that made me want to scream. I might even be realer than you. The world looked glassier than ever, faded and brittle except for the obscenely bright monstrosity above me. I stamped my foot and held my breath, praying that the world would shatter, taking the Technicolor monster with it. If I broke a broken world, would I break anything at all? But the pavement remained solid. The frozen chill bypassed the soles of my shoes and leached into my feet. The creature stretched and stretched and stretched, slowly snaking its way down the trunk of the tree. Simultaneously sloth-like and reptilian, bursting with that ridiculous Crayola fur. It should have been funny. Why wasn't it funny? Why was I scared? Why wasn't I running away? It slid down the bark until its eyes were level with my own. Only really real things, it intoned, can hide themselves in plain sight. Real things like me and Jason Hughes. Your friends call me Muppet Man. You can, too. It extended a hand, long and absurdly thin, almost like distorted frog feet except for the rainbow fur. I turned and ran into the school, screaming all the way. The poor nurse tried to extract the story from me. I don't even remember what I said. I just remember hiding under her desk and sobbing. When I finally blubbered the words Muppet Man and Jason, the school went on lockdown. The cops came. My father wasn't with them. I watched through the window, gagging and crying and trying to forget Muppet Man's bright green eyes. But how could I, when everything else, the oak tree and the police, the nurse and the sky and my own shaking hands, looked so brittle and faded? Muppet Man was the only vibrant thing. The only bright thing. The only whole thing. The only real thing. Some time later, maybe a minute, maybe 10 hours for all I knew, a cop came into the nurse's office. He grabbed my elbow over the protestations of the nurse and marched me outside. The world rushed past me in a grey, dead, glittering blur. The tree loomed ahead, dark and blank and terribly close. I flailed, but he dragged me to the oak tree and shoved me forward. I stopped inches from the bark. Dark and dead and cracked, except for absurd tufts of Technicolor fur. Did you do that? The cop demanded. Do what? I screamed. Do what? Did you put that, he pointed to a particularly obscene knot of neon pink fur, on this tree? I told him no. I told him it was Muppet Man, that I'd seen Muppet Man, that Muppet Man knew Jason and now he knew me. The nurse sent me home shortly thereafter, and my parents packed me off to my grandparents' house in San Diego that very night. I stayed for 3 weeks. Stayed until I stopped having nightmares of Muppet Man eating Jason's bloody, shit-stained clothes while I watched, trapped by his bright eyes like a deer in headlights. I got home on a Wednesday evening. I know it was Wednesday because I remember looking at my mom's calendar. Big and glossy and full of beagle puppies. It always made me smile. My parents fed me Burger King and ice cream cake, then sent me to bed. When I pulled my covers back, I froze. Everything around me blanched, turning pale and glassy. Everything except the dirty tufts of neon bright fur on my pillow. My parents assumed I did it and yelled at me for almost an hour, but they let me sleep in their bed anyway. School was a nightmare. I spent the entire morning dreading recess. When the bell rang, I thought about throwing a tantrum just to stay in the classroom. But I'd get in trouble. My parents would be angry. I'd go to the principal's office. Besides, there'd be other kids on the playground. Vibrant, living, colorful, noisy kids. All that noise and brightness might be too much for Muppet Man. I told myself these things, but still ran to the bathroom when the bell rang. I threw up, then sat in the stall until a teacher, summoned no doubt by a tattletale, came and told me I had to go outside. I dithered in the corner by the tetherball court, as far from the oak tree as I could get. Even from a distance, I thought I caught glimpses of bright fur slithering through the branches. I decided I was seeing things. When the days finally got warmer, steel skies softening to rich blue in the daytime and Easter egg colors at night, bare branches sprouting buds, flowers growing in the planter boxes all around the school, I resumed my recess ritual of reading under the tree. I was cautious at first, but determined. Every adult in my life had me convinced that I was hallucinating. Every kid in the school knew I'd had a breakdown about Muppet Man. The taunts alone were enough to steel my resolve. Before I knew it, I was reading under the tree like always, the glassy winter horror barely more than memory. One afternoon in April, something pulled me out of my book. I didn't know what it was at first. Maybe the kids screaming on the jungle gym. Maybe the fifth-grade girls gossiping a few yards away. Maybe the warm breeze rustling the leaves. I looked down and gasped. Larvae crawled along my arms. The yellow-white caterpillar worms that lived in the bark, the kind all the kids said Muppet Man loved to eat. I ran to the tetherball court and lingered until the bell rang. When I got home that afternoon, I found clusters of neon fur all over my bedroom. I ran to my mother. She lost her temper, marched me into the backyard, and told me to stay until she was done cleaning up after me. When I finished crying, I settled myself under the apricot tree and got lost in my book. As the afternoon light deepened, rich daylight giving way to copper, something snapped me out of my reverie. I looked down and saw white worms. Soft and tiny and somehow wet, inching over my arms. "Hello," whispered an unpleasantly friendly voice. "Sorry it's been so long. I guess I've been a bad friend. I'm crazy," I whispered. I snapped my book shut and closed my eyes. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Scratchy polyester fur crumpled against my skin. "Not crazy," Muppet Man said. "Just really real. Like me and Jason Hughes." "What are you reading?" He reached out, blinding multicolor fur blazing in the dappled sunlight, and flipped the book over. "Black Beauty. Is it good?" "It's great," I wheezed. I wanted to leap to my feet, wanted to run screaming into the house, but my bones felt watery and frozen at once. I wouldn't be able to stand up, let alone run. Muppet Man brushed the worms off my arm and settled down beside me. His fur made me feel itchy. I didn't look up. I already knew what I would see, that slothy dinosaur face dominated by glassy eyes that would blaze in the dying sun. I didn't want to see it. I was afraid of what would happen if I did. "My mom will see you," I whispered. He patted my arm, fur crunching again. "You should read to me." Tears flooded my eyes. "No." Strong, fuzzy fingers wrapped my wrist. "I want you to read to me." "No. If you read to me, I'll take you to Jason Hughes." I almost scoffed. Jason Hughes with the giant glasses and the keening voice, anxious Jason Hughes who stole all the art paper in the classroom just to draw his stupid fish and stupid beetles, Jason Hughes who'd been reduced to bloody, shit-stained clothes at the base of the schoolyard tree. "Why?" I asked. "Because we're lonely," Muppet Man said. I glanced at the house, praying my mother would look out and see us. If he's lonely, he should go home. He can't. His mom doesn't like him. I pondered this briefly. I thought of my dad. My poor dad who worked himself to death with overtime. My poor dad who couldn't catch a break at work. But what if I could help him? What if I could find Jason Hughes, and give my dad all the credit? When would I see Jason? "It depends," said Muppet Man, "on how well you read." I opened my book to the very first page and began to read aloud. The scrape of the sliding glass door broke my concentration shortly after. I looked up and saw my mom. My heart leapt to my throat. I spun around hopefully, but Muppet Man was gone. The next morning, I found clumps of neon fur in my dresser drawers. It clung to my pants and shirts like lint. At the end of May, I found a note on my windowsill. Neatly folded construction paper printed with brightly colored marker. Come to the school tree tonight at 11. Your friend, M.M. Coarse strands of yellow, pink, and blue hair sprinkled the note. I brushed them off and tucked the paper in my pocket. I wasn't stupid. I knew I couldn't go alone. I was terrified of Muppet Man and almost as terrified of what my parents would do to me if they caught me sneaking out. So I went to my father. I showed him the note and begged until I wept. He accused me of making it all up for a while, but in the end he agreed to take me to the school at the appointed time. We lived only a few blocks away, so we walked. The evening was unseasonably cold, almost as cold as the day I first met Muppet Man. I fought back tears the entire way, clutching my father's hand with both of my own. The school gates were locked, of course, but there was a small gate hidden in a passage behind the cafeteria. It had nothing but a simple latch. The kids all knew about it, but the adults never did anything. I led my father around the perimeter of the playground, keeping close to the buildings in order to hide in the shadows. Wait here, I whispered. He obliged, looking tired even in the darkness. I looked at the tree. It didn't look sick anymore. Leaves hid the mistletoe infestation. It looked full and healthy, the eternal sentry once more. I stood by the trunk and whispered, "Hello." Something rustled among the leaves overhead. "Hello," came Muppet Man's warm, full voice. "Where's Jason?" The branches rattled and a dark, furry shape slithered down the tree. Glassy eyes caught the light of the moon and blazed. "He's inside me." Muppet Man twisted and stretched down the tree until his eyes were level with mine. No longer was he vibrant or bright. His fur was filthy, caked with mud and sand, and bare, dirty canvas replaced large swaths of the once lush neon coat. Of course he was missing fur. He'd been leaving clumps of it all over my room for months. It was a wonder he had any hair left. "What do you mean?" My voice issued in a thin, wheezy whine. Muppet Man crept closer, holding me captive with his glass eyes. His long, thin fingers touched his chin and pushed, sliding into his face and pulling it up like a child removing a Halloween mask. My heart thudded, heavy and horrid as a war drum. Enormous glasses glinted in the moonlight, tragically outsized for the decayed little face underneath. Jason Hughes's rotted head was grey and so very fragile, gleaming like clouded glass under the moon. If I touched him, he would shatter. The absurd costume fell to the ground with a whisper. Dull and faded. Even the eyes were dead now. The costume was dead. It had never been alive. Jason's empty sockets bulged, then broke and split apart with a series of soft, papery pops. Something roiled inside, thick and dark and gleaming with 1,000 dim lights in colors I couldn't name. The world flipped and cold playground sand dug into my face. My dad's scream shattered the glassy silence. Perhaps it shattered Jason's poor dead face, too. I curled up and lay still as my dad screamed and sirens wailed in the distance. The ruined costume went into an evidence locker. Jason himself was laid to rest several weeks later. They held onto the body as long as they did in order to find out what happened to him. I asked my father about it, but he refused to tell me. I was disappointed yet relieved, and I never tried to find out on my own. I did my best to forget everything, and actually came close. I might have managed had my father kept his mouth shut. He has a habit of telling me things I shouldn't know. Things nobody should know. I guess it's a personal exorcism, freeing demons that haunt you. It's just that the problem with freeing demons is that demons usually go on to haunt someone else. My dad retired a few years ago, but he still has friends on the force. They get together and talk every once in a while. They had one of their visits last night, and one of his friends brought up Jason Hughes. Did they find the guy who did it? My dad asked. No, said his friend. But the costume, that weird puppet costume? It's not in evidence anymore. It's gone. Did someone take it? Did they accidentally toss it? We don't know. That alone was enough to haunt me forever. But it didn't stop at enough. Demons never stop at enough, if they ever stop at all. I know this because when I got up this morning, I found dirty tufts of neon fur scattered all across my bedroom floor. Story 2, my new girlfriend is very strange and I don't think leaving her will help. My name is Kevin, and I have been single for almost a year until this past month. I didn't intend to start dating anybody either, it just sort of happened. I was at a bonfire when I noticed a pretty brunette I had never seen before sitting across the fire from me. Like me, she wasn't drinking and socializing, just sitting and staring at the fire. I immediately noticed how attractive she was. She was on a whole new level of pretty and I knew I didn't have a shot in hell with her, but still, I tried. "You waiting for someone or?" I found myself blurting out louder than I had wanted. She didn't say a word. She didn't look up and acknowledge me or anything. That should have been my first hint she wasn't interested, but I thought maybe she didn't hear me or maybe she thought I was talking to someone else. "Hey, you wanna go grab a drink?" I asked her even louder than the first time. She shot her head up with an angry expression, but as soon as she locked eyes with me she relaxed a little bit. "Kevin?" she asked. She must have noticed the shock expression on my face. I had never seen this girl before, yet here she was knowing my name. "Sorry, I heard your friend say your name earlier and I couldn't help watch you for a while." She put her head down as her cheeks blushed. I felt my heart pounding with excitement. How could a girl like that be checking me out? She was absolutely stunning and here I was being noticed by her. In fact, I think that's why I ignored her wording. "Watching me for a while." We talked for a while after exchanging names. Hers was Amy, and then left. We ended up at my place and have been inseparable since. Everything was great until this past week. I started to notice some pretty strange things that I just couldn't ignore. For instance, she was using the restroom the other day and I went to knock on the door to see if she wanted to order some pizza for our movie night, but I heard her talking to someone. At first I thought maybe she was on the phone until I remembered her phone was charging on the stand. Her conversation struck me as odd too. "No, he's waiting for me right now, I can't be too long," I heard her whisper, "then wait for an answer. Just come later tonight, he passes out early and sleeps heavily, you can do it then." After that she flushed the toilet and I heard the sink turn on. I rushed quietly back to the living room and acted as if I knew nothing. "Hey, sorry, you about ready?" she asked, acting normal. "Yeah. You want some pizza for the movie?" I tried to sound as normal as possible. She nodded yes and plopped back on the couch. Later that night I forced myself to stay awake and wait for whatever it was she was planning and was going to bust her in the act. I figured she was cheating on me and I couldn't stand the thought of it, but I had to know the truth. Only thing that wasn't making sense was she didn't have her phone. She could have had a different phone she kept hidden though. Around 1 a.m. I felt the pressure on her side of the bed let up and she snuck quietly out of the room. I waited until I knew she was far enough away from the room until I got out of bed. My heart was pounding from adrenaline and anger. I'd be damned if I was going to be made a fool of, even if she was the hottest girl I had ever been with. I thought of everything I was going to say to her as I crept down the hallway until I was just around the corner from the living room. I could hear her talking quietly to someone and my heart raced again. It was true. She was cheating on me. Wait. Was that a female voice? I leaned my head closer to the corner until just my eye was poking around the corner. She was standing right in front of the mirror, in the pitch black. "He's sleeping, what is it you want me to do?" she asked her reflection. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My new girlfriend was completely nuts. Go figure, that's just my luck. My shoulders sunk a little in disappointment as the realization of my situation set in. That is until her reflection moved, without her moving. At first I thought I was seeing things and rubbed my eyes clear. I saw it again. Her reflection was moving completely different than what Amy was. My heart started pounding in a whole new way. I've never feel like that before and I didn't like it one bit. I quietly snuck back to the room and made it sound like I was just getting up. I didn't want her to suspect anything. "Amy?" I called out fake sleepily. Thud thud thud. My heart started racing again. It sounded like she was running full blast back to the bedroom, and with what I just saw, it was a terrifying moment. The door yanked open and Amy was panting. "What is it, baby?" she asked out of breath. "Why are you all sweaty and panting? Where were you?" I asked fake sleepily again. "Sorry, I was getting a glass of water and thought you were in trouble the way you called for me." She frowned. Out of the corner of my eye I saw my bedroom mirror, and thank God it was mimicking Amy's movements. "Oh no, I'm fine, I just woke up and you weren't here, was just wondering where you went." I faked a smile. "Oh okay, good, well I'll be back in a minute, just going to use the bathroom real quick," she said with a smile. As she turned and left, I noticed out of the corner of my eye her reflection stayed just a little bit longer than she did, and it had this sickening grin on its face. I pretended not to notice and rolled over to go back to sleep. I don't know what in the fuck is going on, but can someone please tell me if they have ever had anything similar to this happen? What should I do? I don't think breaking up with her is going to help because, well, mirrors are everywhere and I'm afraid something will happen if I try to leave. Any advice would be appreciated. I'll post more updates when I'm able to. Story 3, can I have some of your time? Call bank position. No limit to what you can make. Innovative employees call now 888 555 4x. Sure. No limit to what I can make at a call bank? Whatever. But I'd done similar work before. Hell, I had done pretty much all work before. I was broke, not picky. So I decided to call the number. Rent was due, my electricity was 2 weeks from getting cut off, and I needed cash quickly. So I called the number and they said they were having a group interview on Saturday and it paid $20. I jumped the bus down there and wound up taking some weird psychological test. Bizarre stuff, but $20 for 2 hours sitting in a crummy strip mall filling out a test wasn't so bad, even if I didn't get a call back. But I did. I was barely home when I got a call telling me to show up at 9 a.m. on Monday to start work, and to wear a tie. This is where it gets weird, well, weirder. I hop off the bus the next morning and I'm at a really nice building. I've worked at call centers before and they're always in some cheap, crummy place where square footage is cheap. This building is gorgeous. I'm brought up to the floor and shown to my individual office. Not a cubicle, an office. It's nice, and while I don't have a window I am definitely not complaining. I'm shown around by an office manager who explains my new job. I'm to call people and ask for some of their time. If they agree, I transfer them to one of the principals. I find the numbers I want to target. Red flags galore at this point. I don't even know what we're selling, and she makes it clear that I just have to get them to agree to give us some of their time. This makes no sense. No product, no call list provided, paid based on how well I do. Seems like a scam, right? Totally bizarre. Maybe a cult. There are only a few workers and they just seemed to be milling around. Then the principals arrived. Older men and women, but glamorous in an old money way. They just dripped wealth, their clothes were expertly done, everything looked incredible. One stopped in front of the office manager and smiled a perfect smile. "Mr. Smith, this is our new caller Caleb, he'll be directing calls to you today." Mr. Smith nodded at me. "We're very excited to have you on board, Caleb." His eyes looked strange, almost reptilian. "This is the first opening we've had for a while, I'm sure you'll make us proud." After getting introduced to the phone system I started just dialing random numbers. Finally I got an older man who laughed when I asked if I could have 15 minutes of his time. "Sure thing, son, don't have anything else to do today." I quickly put him on hold and dialed Mr. Smith. "Who am I speaking to?" he asked. "Ronald, redacted, retired, thinks we've got an exciting new product." "And how much of his time is he providing us?" 15 minutes. "Thank you, Caleb, please put him through." 2 minutes later Mr. Smith appeared in my office door. "Good job, Caleb, first calls don't often go that well. Now try to find someone willing to give you more time, you'll get paid for how much time you can provide us. Remember, you can call anyone." That was another huge red flag. He couldn't have been on the phone more than a minute. What were we doing here? Things got weirder. I figured I would try a phone sex hotline. If I'm paying, they'd give me as much time as I wanted, right? As it turns out, they would not. I got connected to Destiny, and once I asked if I could have some of her time, she got immediately weird. We told you people not to call here anymore. No, you can't. She hung up. I tried twice more on different lines and got the same response. I hadn't had much luck when one of the other callers asked if I wanted to eat lunch together in the conference room. There were only 3 other callers, and I figured I could pump them for information. I tried to bring up every red flag so far, but they all shut down any questions. Mike finally leveled with me. Listen man, I've got a high school diploma and 5 kids. I've been here 8 years and made $500,000 last year, and took plenty of vacation. Stop asking questions. This job is the best thing that'll ever happen to you. Instead of focusing on what we were doing, I asked for tips on who to call. Mike focused on stay-at-home parents he could tell they won a vacation. Carol liked to call empty nesters. Susan checked resume boards and asked people if she could have their time to discuss a professional opportunity. They asked what I was doing, and when I said I had tried a few phone sex hotline, they all laughed. Those stopped working 2 years ago after they caught on to us, Mike said, though I didn't understand what he meant. After lunch I got back to it, trying some of what everyone had suggested. I had a bit more luck, and finished up with 4 hours. At the end of the day I was called into Mr. Smith's office and presented with a check for $250. His office was odd. Full of weird books sold in foreign languages and antiques. There was also a red digital clock on his desk, ticking backwards from what looked like just over 600,000 minutes. "A good first day, Caleb," he began. "Remember, it's not just the time you gather, it's the time you use. Today you spent 8 hours here and generated 4 hours, it's a negative day. But you'll get the hang of it." At exactly 5 o'clock the principals, there were 10 of them, left their offices and descended into luxury cars, the doors held open by their own drivers. I went to a check cashing place and then bought a prepaid debit card so I could pay my electric bill. The next few weeks went well. I was getting the hang of it, and had very few negative days. Each day I was assigned to a new principal, and they all seemed to like me. The other workers relaxed around me too, and my checks grew, soon going over $1,000 a day. I got used to the weirdness. All the offices were full of antiques, with the exception of a digital clock each principal had on their desk, counting backwards from some giant number. I had no idea what we sold. It was a weird game to convince people to say they would give me some time. But I didn't care. I paid off my debt. I had an actual bank account that was growing for the first time in years, and I was able to upgrade my wardrobe. Then I had my big break. I had read an article about how hard the academic job market was so hard. The next day I found a good candidate online, PhD, postdoc, and was posting his CV everywhere he possibly could. The phone was picked up on the first ring. The guy on the other end already reeked of desperation. "Hi, is this Tim, redacted? I'm calling this morning about an open professor position we have. Can I have some of your time?" "Sure thing." He was clearly nervous. How much time do you need?" "Well," I replied, "how about the rest of your life?" I could hear the thrill in his voice through the phone. "Does this mean a tenure-track position? Let me get you connected." I put him on hold and dialed Mr. Smith, who picked up immediately. "Grad student, thinks he's getting a tenure-track position. How much time is he giving us?" Mr. Smith asked. I paused. "The rest of his life." "Good job, Caleb, put him through." At the end of the day I was presented with a check for $100,000. The principals said I might set a record for the highest earner. I put a down payment on a condo and moved out of my crappy apartment. When I had another big day 2 weeks later, I bought a new car so I could drive to work, and bought a spot in the expensive garage in our building. My parents visited and I took them out to an expensive dinner. For the first time in years they didn't think I was a failure. Everything was going great. I had money, my own place, a new car. I got up the confidence to ask out a friend of mine, Amy, and we started dating. Everything was going well until I went out one night to pick us up a bottle of wine from the corner store to have with dinner. On the newspaper rack was a picture of a young man with the headline "Grad Student Found Dead." I picked it up and saw the name of Tim, redacted. He had been found dead in his apartment, and his death was completely mysterious. I read through the article. He had died the day I called him. I called Amy and said I was feeling suddenly sick and I was going to go home. After a sleepless night and a trip to a local store, I had a plan. I arrived at work early the next day and set up a camera in the office of the principal I would be working for that day, Ms. White. It was tiny and discreet, but I could monitor it from my office. When the principals arrived, I said hello to her and retreated to my office where I turned on the recorder. She was in her office with the door shut, reading some book in a language I couldn't understand. Her clock was on her desk and counting down from 754,000 minutes. I made a few calls before I got a hit, a student who jumped at the idea of a 2-week all-paid vacation. I transferred him through and then turned back to the recording. Ms. White picked up the phone and the smooth words poured from her mouth, "Good morning to our big winner. I understand you're willing to give us 2 weeks of your time?" She smiled and hung up the phone suddenly. As she did, I realized that the clock on her desk had changed. It now had an additional 20,000 minutes on it. This pattern repeated itself throughout the day. I couldn't figure out what was happening. At the end of the day though, suddenly I saw her moving. She picked up her phone even though I hadn't called her, and started speaking. "Is this Amy? Good afternoon, I'm one of Caleb's bosses." Yes, we're very fond of him too. Listen, we're planning a surprise for him and I need some of your time. Is that okay?" "Well, I'm not sure, but how about I take as much of your time as I need?" She laughed. "Perfect, thank you." She hung up. Her clock jumped again, this time by tens of millions of minutes. She turned towards the camera and looked right into it. "You shouldn't have done that, Caleb." I ran to the door of my office, but found it locked from the outside. I pounded on it, and then tried to call 911, but suddenly my cell phone had no service, and my office phone was disconnected. I screamed and kicked the door. It was hours before I slumped, defeated, against the wall. I heard the click and the door swung open to show Mr. Smith. He motioned for me to follow him into his office. When I arrived, I realized his clock, which I hadn't gotten a good look at for a few weeks, was also tens of millions of minutes higher than it had been. "You're a natural, Caleb." I stared at the floor as he continued. "But you pushed too hard for answers. So we had to show you what we were capable of. We had to make you understand." I glared at him. "That grad student is dead." He nodded. "So is your girlfriend. We had to make an example." "What are you?" He smiled. "We've been called many things over the years. So many names, so many rumors. The truth is this, we are immortal, but we need others to freely give their time to us. In old times this caused a rumor that we had to be invited into a house, that we could not enter freely. But those same rumors also made us seem most unsavory." I spat at him. "So we're killing people? That sounds pretty unsavory to me." He sighed. "Not very often. Someone will get a phone call and offer 2 weeks of their life, an hour, a month. When they are older they will never realize that they lost that time, so we hang up and they feel a tiny bit older, though they cannot describe it." I stared at the desk while my world swirled. "What do I do?" He smiled. "You will have a good life. You will come to work and continue to help us get time. You will be handsomely rewarded. You may stop if you like, but you will never speak of this to anyone, or there will be consequences. We needed you to understand that." He paused and then took a check out of his desk for $500,000. "A bit extra, since I know there was an emotional connection for you today." I took the check as he walked past me. "You can have a life people only dream of, Caleb. Your recent work has been exemplary, really pushing the envelope of what we thought was possible." I waited for a few minutes before I took the elevator to the lobby and walked out into the night. I felt nothing. It was like my soul had left my body, leaving only emptiness. My life stretched out before me, and I knew how it would look. Full of money, importance, glamour, empty pleasures. I knew I would deposit the check in my pocket into my account. I knew I would be back at work in the morning. What else did I have? What else could I do? Maybe you are hoping for a job, or a vacation, or for your luck to change. Maybe you've been waiting to hear about an exciting new investment opportunity, or you're just lonely and want to spend some time chatting with someone. What I'm asking is, can I have some of your time? Story 4, my kleptomania has gotten out of control and I've only just realized it. It wasn't this bad before. I used to just take things nobody would care about, chapstick, pens, bags of chips, nothing big or extraordinary. Sometimes, I'd even return what I'd taken. Apologize for it. Explain myself. This time, I'm really in deep shit. There's no coming back from this. I must have stolen at least 1,000 things over the past couple months. Hell, more than 1,000. I can't even count how many things I've just snatched from people. My attic is filled to the brim with family pictures and lipsticks and bottles of lotion that I don't use. I'm a hoarder. This has made me a hoarder. I remember exactly what I took last year, on this day. I stole my sister's pillow. I stole her pillow from her house in Maryland, states away. It's not just a pillow. It's one that she bought specifically for her back problems, shaped like a wedge with a bump in the middle, not even comfortable for regular people. She can't afford another one. I took the only thing that brings her comfort. And I couldn't even stop myself when I drove away with it. I felt like a piece of shit, I still do. But I need it, too. It makes me happy. It makes me calm. I took watches and clocks, even though the ticking sound of the clocks I've taken now buzzes like a drone. I've stored at least 36 watches just in one corner of my bedroom. God, it's fucking annoying at this point. But I can't just give them back. I borrowed watering cans for plants I don't have, and band-aids for wounds I lied about having. I took my friend's dog toys and Tupperware and clothes. There's so much junk that I've taken. It's treasure to me, though. A couple days later, I took my neighbor's cat. She was a gentle, frail, older woman. A widow. Her children never visit, nor do her grandchildren call her anymore. All she had was her cat. She asked me to watch it while she went out to visit her grandkids across the country, and I happily obliged. What else could I do? She told me to not let it out, no matter how much it meowed, because it's not microchipped. In fact, it's a kitten of a stray. It has no vaccines, no chip, nothing. I nodded and let her leave, waving her goodbye. And I took the cat to get vaccinated and microchipped. I took her cat. It's mine. When she came back, she called the police on me. They couldn't do anything, it was my cat, after all. I just smiled at them and sent them off after the fact. I still have that cat. It's living with me, traversing through the piles of useless shit and trinkets. A beautiful calico thing. Nothing extravagant really happened between the catnapping and now. I kept taking things, of course, cups, necklaces, sneakers, and the like. But last week was the most eventful. My mother passed away, so my sister and I flew out to Oregon to attend her funeral. I asked to be alone with her body for a while, to mourn. It was only when I started toward the back door to have a cigarette when I realized, she's still in my arms. I was holding my mother's corpse in my arms. I stole her from her own casket. Her lifeless, cold body felt like it was haunting me. So I ran. I ran with my mother's fucking corpse. I put her body in the trunk of the car I rented, and I started to drive home. I started to drive from Oregon to Illinois, with my own mother's body. I felt sick while driving. I had to pull over countless times just to vomit. But I made it back eventually. I don't even think I stopped for any reason other than to quell my sickness. I stored her body in my closet, buried behind piles of clothes and shoes and cans of Febreze and laundry baskets. I told nobody. My sister called me when they realized that I and the body were missing. She screamed at me. I told her that I just went outside for a cigarette and then walked around. I told her that some sick fuck must have taken her. I told her that it wasn't me, and I excused myself. I said that I needed to scream. That I was going to call the police. Of course, I never did that. I just sat in my house, staring at the wall that was hidden behind stacks of books and vases and globes that didn't belong to me. Yesterday, I did the unthinkable. I did something that I'm going to fucking hell for. I managed to take something worse than my own mother's body. I kidnapped somebody. I kidnapped somebody living. A living, breathing person. A child. An infant. I stole my co-worker's infant while babysitting her. God, I'm so fucked up. He hasn't returned home yet. He hasn't found out. I can still put her back. I can still make things right. But God, if I do, I'd be so empty. My head would pound. I'd just take her again. I know that this is it for me. Once the police are called, they'll figure out everything. They'll wade through the stolen cans of Coke and the teddy bears and the candles. They'll push past all the silverware and the lamps and the power strips, and they'll find me holding a child that isn't mine, next to my mom's rotting body. I'll go to prison forever. I already know it. But until then, I've got to keep going. I feel empty, and my boss just called my phone. He wants me to come in and cover for somebody. This time, I think I'll steal some lives. Story 5, there was something not right about the college I visited. My name is Clara Samuel. I'm 17, and I'm a senior at a small high school about an hour outside of Philly. And I'm smart. Really smart actually. I've had straight A's in all of my classes since middle school. I'm not gifted or anything, I just worked my ass off for one reason, getting out of this town and going to college. My parents are both alcoholic idiots who filter in and out of my life. I'm an only child, and I take care of myself for the most part. It seems sad, but I don't mind. I have good friends and I like being independent. But it would be nice to have some help with college. The application process is intense, and I'm already feeling overwhelmed. My parents have no money, so I already know I have to get a scholarship if I want to go anywhere. But that's harder than it seems, and most of the schools I've talked to said they can't help me out. The deadlines are getting closer and I'm starting to get panicky. I was in Spanish class one Tuesday when I got an email. Holding my phone on my lap, I opened it. It read, Mrs. Samuel. Hi. My name is Jessica Myers, and I'm the Dean of Admissions at White Ridge University in Philadelphia. Your academic record has come to my attention and it is very impressive. I would love if you would stop by for a private tour next week. We are prepared to give you a full scholarship. Please let me know if you plan on stopping by. Jessica Myers, Dean of Admission, White Ridge University. Yes, it was a little weird. A quick Google search brought up the school, and I read some information on it. It was very small, but its academic statistics were impressive. Biology, my major, was one of their most well-known departments. Not only that, they said they would give me a full scholarship. I emailed Jessica back right away, and told her I would stop by on Monday around 4. She responded with the address of her office and told me she would see me then. Next Monday came and I left school after the bell and got in my car. I drove up to Philadelphia, then plugged in the address Jessica gave me. When I arrived on campus, I was struck by how beautiful it was. Everything was brand new and high-tech. The students walking around were beautiful too, with backpacks and White Ridge University sweatshirts. As I passed by them on the street, I noticed they all seemed a little off, maybe. They looked sad and quiet, and I tried to catch their eyes. They looked away. It was strange, but I chalked it up to the stress of starting school again and found Jessica's office. Jessica's office was on the top floor of one of the beautiful buildings. Her assistant instructed me to wait outside her office, and about 5 minutes later Jessica walked out. Jessica was young and beautiful, in a pantsuit and a broad smile. You must be Clara, she said, taking my hands in her own. I am so happy to meet you. It's nice to meet you, too, I said. Your school is beautiful. Yes, it is, isn't it? She said, we all worked very hard on it. She assistant handed her her coat, Well, let's not waste any more time, I'm sure you're anxious to see the school. Let's go. Jessica and I left her office. On the way out, I tried to smile at her assistant, but she avoided my eyes. Weird. We started in the dining hall. It was white and brand new, like everything else. It smelled amazing, and the food as it passed by me looked amazing too. The students moved through the line in a robotic sort of way, not speaking. They took the food and put it on their tray, then swiped their student IDs and sat down. One after another, the same thing every time. The more I started to look around, the weirder it got. But Jessica chattered away in my ear about the amazing food they have at Whiteridge. And we can accommodate to everyone, Jessica said, so don't worry, you'll still get your vegetarian option. My head snapped toward her. How did you know I'm a vegetarian? Just a feeling, Jessica laughed. I'm one myself, it just makes me feeling like I'm making a difference, you know? Jessica turned on her heel and walked towards the door. I started to follow her, but I caught the eye of a boy sitting alone at a table. His salad sat in front of him, untouched. His eyes grew wide as I looked at him. With the smallest motion of his hand, he beckoned me toward him. I take a step closer. Get out of here, Clara, he says in a harsh whisper, get out. Before I can react, Jessica had her hands around my upper arm, pulling me away. That's just Kyle. He's the prankster on campus, she laughed, you know how boys are. Now I was officially freaked out. I allowed Jessica to lead me out of the dining hall to the sidewalk, but I started looking for ways to escape. I wasn't sure what was wrong, but I knew something was. Next we're going to see the biology lab, Jessica said, it's state-of-the-art, brand new. You'll love it. Now how the hell did she know that I wanted to major in biology? Jessica showed me the lab, and she's right, it is beautiful. The students worked away with goggles and lab coats, moving robotically between the tables, not speaking. The teacher stood at the front of the room, just standing, immobile. That was all I need to confirm my suspicions. There was something really wrong here. As Jessica turned her back to explain something else, I took my chance. I turned and sprinted out the door. The minute I stepped outside, I am greeted with 20 students and teachers in a line facing me. I stopped dead in my tracks. I felt Jessica come up behind me and grab my arm. She spun me around to face her and put her face inches from mine. You ungrateful little bitch, she hissed. I'm prepared to give you money to go to this school, and you run away from me. No wonder your parents don't love you, you disgusting little coward. I felt tears forming in my eyes. What is this place? I said in a hushed whisper, where the hell am I? Oh, shut up, Jessica snapped. Come with me. No, I started to struggle. Let me go. I want to go home. If you just let me show you what I have to show you, you'd understand, Jessica said calmly. Besides, she motioned to the group of students and teacher gathered around us, their faces expressionless. You're not getting very far. She had a point. So I went limp, and let her drag me away to the same building her office is in. This time she stops at a different floor, and I follow her down the hall. She paused outside a door, holding a key. Clara, this room holds your whole future, Jessica said. Everything Whiteridge can offer you is behind this door, if you chose to accept it. I don't know why I went in. I should have turned and ran. Maybe I could have fought off those people. I could have done anything else besides go in the room. In that room I learned why students chose Whiteridge, and why they didn't really choose at all. I learned why their faces were expressionless and dead, almost defeated. It all made sense after that. It was a one-time mistake. He had it coming. He raped me. I don't regret what I did. I do regret doing it in a place that has security cameras. But I want to know how the hell Jessica got that footage, and what she wants with me. But I don't regret it. Whiteridge will become my new home, maybe I will adjust eventually. But I shouldn't have gone in that room. Maybe jail would be better than this. Clara Jones. Office of Admissions, Whiteridge University. Story 6, Drifting Through Life. The 14th of May 1958. Yesterday morning, my body woke up, but I didn't. Something must have split in the nighttime as the moonbeams pierced through the blinds of my bedroom window. The crickets chirped while my psyche severed, and now there are two. It's an odd feeling, like riding in the back seat of your own car. You try to catch the driver's reflection in the rear view mirror, but it's always too foggy. So you resign, slumping against the seat, and hope the car doesn't crash. The 3rd of June 1958. I can never tell when I will wake up or not. I wish it were every other day, or some sort of recognizable pattern, but instead each morning is a roll of the dice. I've begun communicating with the other, the one who sleeps when I wake and wakes when I sleep. He calls himself James. We leave messages to each other while we are inhabiting the body. Usually, it's just us trying to figure out what's happening, but it's mostly conjecture. It's not too bad when I'm drifting, the term we like to use for when we're not in control of the body. It's almost peaceful. You're not exactly in a place or time, but you are aware of your own thoughts. You can't see anything either, except the shifting shadows of your own imagination. It's like a daydream that you can't snap out of. The 6th of July 1958. Yesterday, I didn't wake up and neither did James. It seems that our mind has suffered another fracture. James didn't leave his usual update in our notebook that we use to pick up where the other left off. I'm writing a note to the new person to see what they know. I hope this doesn't keep happening. The 12th of July 1958. I've finally heard back from Leah. I'll be honest, I didn't expect it to be a girl, but it is what it is. She's a bit confused, understandably, but James and I will be able to fill her in on what she needs to know pretty quick. It's weird. I don't even feel like the body is mine anymore. I've become so detached that it seems like I'm borrowing it now. I don't wake up as frequently as I used to, either. The 5th of August 1958. This is the first time I've woken up since the last entry. Having looked through the notebook, it seems that there are 6 of us now. James has woken up a few times and communicated with the others, thankfully. Is it weird that I'm almost jealous of him? He's woken up more than me and he got to orient the new drifters. It feels as if what was once a perfect mirror, has been thwarted by some hammer over and over again, and the wielder, unsatisfied with the lack of shards he has created with each hit, hits again and again, until the entire mirror shatters. How long until it shatters? The 26th of December 1958. I missed Christmas by one day. I also missed my birthday, Thanksgiving, Halloween, my wedding anniversary, the birth of my second child. Is that even the right word? It seems like all of those things have left my possession. I can't even count how many drifters there are now. I'm lucky I even woke up. I'm afraid this will be the last time I do. I'm afraid of what I'll miss. I feel like I'm even losing myself. But as I lay down to go to bed tonight, I know I must say goodbye to everything that was once only mine. The 23rd of September 2018. I woke up this morning. As I got out of my bed, my body ached in a way I had never felt before. My arms and legs were weak, my knees felt like two bare bones rubbing against each other, my back was twisted. I shuffled over to the bathroom, and turned on the light. I didn't recognize the man in the mirror. He had white hair, deep crevices covering his face, and his eyes were pale. As I reached to touch him, I realized it was me. It has been 60 years since I last woke up. Looking through a closet, I found a scrapbook. I paged through the photos, seeing all the vacations, jobs, children, grandchildren, weddings, funerals I had missed out on. I began to cry. Suddenly, I remembered the notebook. Next to the bed was a green spiral notebook, filled with entries. I sat on the bed and read through them all. James had woken up only a few more times, but after 1964, his name disappeared. Leah, too, only lasted a few years after that. Entry after entry, I began to feel as if it was I who were writing them. I was happy for all those who got the chance to be a part of the mirror-turned mosaic. The pieces all fit together, and I smiled. I knew why I had woken up this morning, so seemingly random after many decades of dormancy. I felt my body weakening by the minute. I laid back down on the bed and closed my eyes. I could see hundreds of faces. I wasn't sure if we would continue drifting, or if this was the end, but it doesn't matter. We are ready. Story 7, What's Behind Door Number 1? No, really. I can't shake the feeling that someone is staring through our peephole at night. It's not that I have any evidence to give weight to my fear, but more that I wake up at the same time every night with a feeling of unshakable dread. That I wake up too terrified to even move, peering through the darkness trying to discern a bath towel from the Grim Reaper. My wife is asleep beside me, God bless her soul, and my cat is purring noisily between our pillows. But I am awake and barely breathing, listening. I wish I could shake the cold shiver of fright, but I know someone is there. I can feel them looking in, quietly observing us from the outside. Now, I can't tell you how long ago this started. It has been maybe 2.5 years since we first moved into our new apartment on the 3rd floor of this building. Originally we felt safe enough to leave our door unlocked at night and never even thought twice about the shared balcony that wraps around the 3rd floor. Actually, our apartment is on a pretty quiet street. Sure, we get the occasional drunken vagrant yelling obscenities at midnight, passing cars blaring music, or any other of the standard array of nighttime disturbances that come with living in a city. But I've never felt threatened. Until recently. A few weeks ago, I started having more and more trouble falling asleep and staying asleep at night. At first it was just discomfort. But as soon as I was accustomed to the physical discomfort, my mind started playing catch-up. Was I really hearing screaming outside, or was it some auditory hallucination? Was I mistaking my cat's high-pitched wheezing snore for the terrified screams of a woman being butchered in the street? Surely. Whatever it was, something compelled me to start locking the front door at night. Maybe that was the start of my paranoia, or maybe it was some guttural instinct, telling me I was in danger. I hope it is only paranoia and not the latter. But tonight I'm not so sure. God. I'm laying here again, trying to find the courage to walk up the steps from our bedroom and put my mind at ease. Just look through the peephole. I'm thankful for every car that passes outside our window for reminding me that we aren't alone with this lurking presence. I just can't bring myself to go upstairs. Q. At 4 a.m., not many cars are passing our apartment anymore, and the silence only helps to multiply my terror. It's exceedingly quiet. The lights from the car wash next door are off tonight. For every time I've cursed their incandescent opulence, I would gladly pay double for them to be shining now. I've got to do it. I can't lay in my bed, night after night, obsessing about the presence at the peephole, and being oppressed by a phantom of my own creation. That's what it is, you know. I've sat in the dark quietude in the dead of night and fabricated this ghost story and have let it run rampant on my imagination. When I get to the door, I won't just look through the peephole, I'll throw the door open. But still, as I walk I try to remember which steps squeak and which steps are silent. And what will I do, I think, as I ascend from the bedroom to the landing, if I open the door and there is someone or something at our door? I don't have a plan, I don't even have a weapon. I supposed I could kick it down the stairs and lock the door. The thought of the confrontation gives me pause as I sit on the steps into the living room, watching the door. Maybe I will just look through the peephole after all. Sigh. As I sidle up to the peephole, quiet as a church mouse, I tell myself to be prepared for anything from an errant plastic shopping bag to an unholy demon from the depths of hell. But what I wasn't prepared for was nothing. I wasn't prepared to see the lights of our apartment complex shining unenthusiastically on the sterile walkway through the apartment courtyard. Feeling utterly stupid and full of a newfound courage, I open the door for a final reassurance. And in doing so my nighttime terror is dispelled as a bad dream of my own conjuring. I close the door, lock it, and check the peephole for good measure. That's when the weight of dread returns to my shoulders. The paralysis crystallizes me, my breath frozen in my chest. I can't turn around. I can't look away from the peephole. A cold shiver just begins to ripple through my body when something suddenly dawns on me. I've been so focused on the front door, I never considered the large glass door leading to our shared balcony. Another cold shiver spikes through my right side. I can feel it watching me. I don't even need to turn around to visualize its silhouette, standing at the balcony door, peering in. My God, another shiver. So frozen in fear, I can't even call to my wife. When suddenly, I hear the door handle begin to turn. Story 8, I think I might be dead. I think I might be dead. You're probably reading this thinking that it's a joke. If I'm dead, then how am I writing this? And what do I mean I think I'm dead? Isn't that something that should be obvious? Well, it's not obvious at all, not to me. It started about 9 days ago. I had woken up that day to bright light filtering through my window. I had lain in bed until hunger had driven me to go to the kitchen and make some breakfast. Seems pretty normal so far, right? I was in dire need of groceries and had been planning to do a big shop that day, so I was obviously surprised when I discovered a fully stocked kitchen. I tried to write it off. Sometimes I get random cravings and drive to the store in the middle of the night to satisfy them, leaving only hazy memories and a half-eaten pint of mint choc chip ice cream. Maybe I had gone out last night and then decided to just do my shopping right then. That wasn't too out of character for me. I tried not to think about it as I ate my Cocoa Puffs and got ready for work. The next 5 days passed by relatively normal, the only odd things a lack of traffic and a peaceful work day. I assumed life was finally giving me a break. On that 6th day of peace, the moment I walked through my door after an easy day of work, my boyfriend called me. He was flying in to see me the next day. He lives in Europe, I live in the United States, and it really wasn't uncommon for one of us to save up money and vacation time and then fly out to see the other, giving barely any warning in advance. In retrospect, I'm surprised that we never flew out to see each other at the same time. So as I was saying, I wasn't surprised that he was flying out to see me, but at the same time I was surprised. We had been fighting the past month or so. Barely a word was exchanged between us that wasn't harsh, so for him to want to come to see me was definitely out of the ordinary. You probably think I'm stupid, maybe he wants to make up with me, or maybe he's crazy enough to fly across the ocean just to break up with me. I must admit that the latter was the first to come to my mind when I hung up. He had sounded so kind and happy, though. I tried not to dwell on the oddness of it all as I made dinner and then tidied up for his arrival. My sleep that night was fitful. I woke up the next morning, dread settled like a rock in the pit of my stomach. I went for a run before breakfast, hoping the endorphins would calm my panic. By the time I had gotten home, eaten, and showered, I was no less worried, but it was time for me to pick him up. I arrived at the airport and I swear my heart stopped in my chest when I saw him standing out front, waiting there for me. I jumped out of the car, rushing to him and holding him close, making sure he was real. The last 3 days had been amazing, he had changed so much, our relationship was better than before, and last night he asked me to marry him. It was last night that changed my perceptions of this reality. We were walking home from the restaurant where he had proposed, and the glow of the street lamps combined with one too many glasses of wine gave our surroundings an eerie feel. The streets were empty, but as we were crossing one of my city's larger intersections, a car appeared out of nowhere, flying far over the speed limit right into our path. My fiancé threw me back, getting me to safety, saving my life, and I watched, my head cracking as it greeted the concrete, as he was crushed. The car sped into the distance, fading away as quickly as it had appeared. I don't know if it was due to shock or head injury, but not soon after my conscience faded. This morning I awoke in my bed, in the warm arms of my dead fiancé. I rightfully flipped out on him, screaming that he was dead and that I had watched him die. He tried to calm me, telling me that it was only a dream. I know what I saw though, and it wasn't a dream. Something inside of me clicked as he held me there, stroking my hair and whispering nonsense in my ear. This wasn't real. These last few days had been a lie. That day I woke up to a kitchen full of food I never bought all the way to my lover's death. Even now, it's not real. It's been too perfect, too unrealistic, too crazy to be real. Maybe I'm dead, maybe this is my version of heaven, Or maybe I'm in some sort of coma, maybe this is the dream. For all I know, I'm in some sort of crazy alternate universe, I don't know. What I do know is this is not my real life. Please someone, anyone help me, explain to me what's going on, please. I must go for now, breakfast is almost done. He's making apple pancakes, my favorite. Story 9, there's something extremely horrifying that hunts in the African savannas. Over a decade ago, I boarded a plane and went to explore the grasslands, or savannas, of Africa. I'd just gotten out of school, and the idea of working with animals and observing their behavior intrigued me to no end. I'd spend all night in a tiny apartment, reading about encounters, attacks and stories told by those native to the area. I was quite involved with an online group of people who shared the same interests as me. Some were professors, some were students, biologists, rangers and so many more. That's where I met Trick. Well, his name is Patrick, but he hates when people call him that. Our friendship was instantaneous. Soon enough, we were planning a trip to fucking Africa. I know, it seems wild and thoughtless, but I was 23 years old and adventurous. The world had so much to offer and I wanted to experience it all. Together we found a guy who was going to guide us and make sure we stayed within the correct perimeter. He knew the line where safe met dangerous and observation met attack. It wasn't a line we wanted to cross. Our guide's name was Han, and he was rugged and intimidating. Also, he smelled like gasoline and we never could pinpoint why. The years wore his face down to tan wrinkles and an adamant frown. "You two kids need to understand something," he'd said, and I remember the gruff, gravelly tone in his voice like I'd heard it yesterday. "My word, whatever I say, will be what keeps you from getting killed." Sounded like he had an authority complex, but we shrugged and nodded along. He was the expert, after all. The air was hot, feathering over my face and the land seemed to stretch on forever. Trees were sparse, but the tall, wispy grass concealed the ground effortlessly. I remember feeling so small, so vulnerable. The sun drowned me in an intense heat, and sweat dripped relentlessly from every pore on my skin. While we set our stuff down in a well-built and sturdy tent, Han continued his speech. "We can go out in a few hours if you'll want to try and see lions hunt. They prefer to hunt at night." Sounds good to me. I looked over at Trick, who seemed confident and excited. "Yeah, me too." Trick didn't shut up the entire time we got our shit ready to head out. His voice wavered in eagerness and he was practically bouncing off the walls of the tent. "Mikey, do you think we'll see anything tonight? Mikey, do you think they'll see us as their prey? Mikey, do you think you can stomach watching an animal get killed right in front of you?" The questions didn't stop until Han hastily pulled open our tent door. "Here," he threw a tightly wadded bag at us, "those are some supplies you're gonna need." Cotton-scented candles? I looked up to meet Han's eyes. "You'll see why. And don't question me on anything. Lions must not like the smell of cotton?" Trick joked. Han let out a humorless laugh. "It ain't just lions I'm trying to protect you from, kid." And with that, he swiftly left, calling out a 5-minute warning before we'd start our first journey. I'm not going to lie and say that Han's words didn't leave a pit of unease in my stomach. I rationalized by telling myself he meant other predators, like hyenas or something. Though, I admit, I'd never heard of using a specific scented candle to ward off any species before. The tires on the Jeep cruised over the land easily, and the breeze dulled the sting of the setting sun. Orange painted the blue sky and left the land blanketed in shades of warmth. After a while, the sky darkened and I saw more stars than I ever have before. God, those stars were beautiful. "Pretty, ain't it?" Han yelled over the engine. "Yeah." I yelled back. Han continued driving, and I noticed Trick's comfortable posture on the other side of the Jeep. His arm hung out of the window, his hand waving against the wind. We pulled over, not too far behind a huge, single tree. With binoculars, a defense weapon, a heavy jacket, and our damn candles, we set up beneath the protection of the trunk. Hans sat between us, making sure to light every single candle until we were encircled. "Why did you choose this area to come to?" Han asked aloud. I'm not going to say the exact area we visited, for reasons you'll later understand. Well, I began, but Trick's voice overpowered mine. Lots of animals attacks here. Are the lions more aggressive? They seem to kill a lot of villagers around this area. More so than other areas. That's not why we came. I added in defense, but they both ignored more. Han let out another laugh, and the sound sent chills down my entire body. In reality, this excursion was cheaper than any others we looked into. By a shit ton. Ain't no lion ever attacked no one out here. Both Trick and I began to speak up, but Han held up an index finger, silencing us. There's another predator out here, even the lions don't fuck with them. I told you when we first spoke on the phone, that this place was dangerous, that you needed to listen to me, and everything would be fine. Okay? I vaguely remembered the first conversation Trick and I had with Han. He made us agree to be completely compliant and to understand the risks of dangerous encounters before he agreed to being our guide. I didn't press him further, but instead muttered a weak, okay, before gluing my eyes to the binoculars. A long time passed with nothing, not even a word spoken in the cool air. The wind rustled the grass around us and flickered the flame ever so slightly. Then, as if someone had hit the mute button on a television, everything went dead quiet. Not the kind of quiet you think, I'm talking about a deafening quiet. No bugs, no sound of the wilderness around us. It was like we were in a vacuumed box. And the air felt still, similar the way the static builds up before a terrible storm. My whole body felt rigid, like cardboard, every hair stood on end. Part of me wanted to take off running, the other part tried desperately to listen to the sound of my heart beating. Han visibly tensed, his eyes serious as he looked at both of us. Softly, but sternly, he whispered, "Don't leave this circle." He gestured to the candles that surrounded us. "Please. What's out there?" Trick asked. Panic was obvious in his face, his hands trembled. Hans stayed silent, taking in a shallow breath. The flames from the candles lit up the small space around us, and brought attention to every detail in our worried faces. But, the flames. Wouldn't they attract attention to us? Han, I began, won't the fire know? I started to ask, but he put his finger to his lips. Listen. Han's face was focused, but something in his eyes looked almost happy? Excited? I couldn't put a finger on it. It sounded like we all stopped breathing at once. And in the distance, we could hear the pounding of feet, like a stampede, but without the familiar sound of hooves. It was a deep thud, but rhythmic. I tried to swallow but my mouth felt dry. With binoculars, I scanned the area to see what was approaching us, but couldn't see anything. I watched the grass, the way the blades melted into the black sky. I watched the horizon. The left, the right, panning over slowly until I saw them. They were blacker than the night sky, fast, skinny, and on all fours. The skin covering their visible bones looked wet, glossy. My stomach felt queasy, and the urge to sprint back to the jeep was so intense I could barely keep myself grounded. My eyes were glued though, I couldn't look away. With every inhuman movement, quick and jumpy, my heart raced just a little bit faster. I knew my body was telling me to run, alerting me, trying to get me away from danger, but my mind told me to stay planted. Don't move. There were 3 of them. They ran around in jerky motions, but in a pack. They didn't look like any animal I had ever studied. I could see the way their muscles moved beneath the thin layer of skin, the way their bones seemed to stretch with every extension of their hind legs, like they were made of rubber. Then suddenly, they stopped. All at once, they halted. And one stood on 2 legs. Its lips curled over curved, sharp, long teeth. It stretched its neck impossibly long, face looking up towards the sky, and it sniffed the air. Shuffling startled me, and I immediately looked over to Trick and Han. There was a horrified expression on Han's face, and the look of not just horror, not just betrayal, not just sadness, but pure dread. And I felt that all over me, from the tip of my hair to my toes. My heart dropped, and even the world felt slow. Like a dream, no nightmare, where time is morphed beyond comprehension. Trick was running toward the jeep. I know he had seen them. His flight response had kicked in and he bolted. The sound of his boots on the dirt were loud, excruciatingly loud, but nothing compared to the high-pitched scream that came from that thing. My eyes locked with Hans. The world sped back up and I could hear them closing in on Trick, not that they were very far anyway. I could feel my throat closing, my body burned and at the same time it felt so numb. The tickle from the tears in my eyes reminded me this was real, and I tried to focus on Hans' face as he mouthed to me in complete silence, quiet. I put my hands over my mouth. The tears began to blur my vision, I blinked them away. The stars. He looked terrified, he looked desperate for me to be as still and as quiet as possible. Look at the stars, focus on them. I did as he said, and stared above me. I counted them as Trixie a splitting scream tore across the savannah. I tried so hard to keep my eyes fixed on the shapes the stars made. Don't look. Don't run. The sound of his screams turned into cries. The snapping of his bones echoed and popped. The ripping of his muscles and the blood-curdling chokes for air settled in every particle of my body. It's a sound I'll never forget. There's a dog in the stars. My eyes traced the shape of its tail. I stared at it until my head began to throb. It felt like hours had passed before the sounds stopped, before the screams died down and the sound of chomping and chewing dissipated. The heavy smell of cotton overpowered the stench of blood. I don't even remember walking back to the jeep. I definitely don't remember the sun coming up. I don't remember when the sound of the grass swaying came back to life, and I don't remember the ride back to the tent. I do, however, remember the very faint splash of blood that covered a tiny part of the ground. That was all that was left of him. I remember hearing Han report another lion attack to the locals. I remember the numbness that covered my mind and body. I could hear Trick's voice, it played like a recording in my mind. I never asked Han why he brought us out there knowing what could happen, or why he didn't warn us. Part of me blames myself, part of me blames him. I never asked him why the scent of cotton, specifically, was what covered our scent the best. My only guess is trial and error. I try not to think about it too much, but I relive it every night in my head. I try to forget and move on, but I simply can't. Could you? And I try to keep my story straight whenever anyone asks me why I hate anything to do with the stars. Story 10, The White Place. Hi r/nosleep. I've been reading a lot of your experiences here and I figured you all might actually give me the time of day, given your open-mindedness. Most people I've told this to figure it's a dream or a hallucination or straight up lies. See what you think. My first time visiting the White Place was when I was 10. I went to bed like any other night, tucked in by my dad, read some of my book and drifted off. When I woke up, I thought I'd woken up in a different room. My dad used to carry me around in my sleep when I was a kid, like if I nodded off on the couch, so waking up somewhere else wasn't that unusual. This was different, though. The ceiling above me was white, the light was white, the walls were white. Everything was white. I looked around, puzzled. It was definitely my room, but it was like someone had painted it all while I was asleep. It was also unusually quiet. I lived at the edge of a pretty big city back then, so I'd usually hear the sounds of cars, trains, people in the street. But that night? Nothing. It took me a while to realize that it was bright outside, too. It felt too soon. I figured I couldn't have been asleep for that long. I stood up and walked to the window. Even my night dress was white. The same pattern of swirls and horses, but dyed pale. Outside, the world had changed to match the room. The sky, the ground, cars, streetlights, even the grass, all blank white. There was no one around, no cars. It was like the middle of the night, but it was as bright as midday. I walked out of my room, stopping to check my parents' room. Empty. My brother's room was deserted too. I called out to them, but there was no reply. No rustling or moving anywhere in the house. Even my dog's bed in the kitchen was empty. I walked outside and closed the front door behind me, but it sounded off. The sound was dull, dead. I heard the latch click but nothing else. Usually I'd hear an echo off the house opposite. As I walked out into the street, I found the same with my footsteps. I could hear them, but they seemed muted. Apart from my steps, the world was absolutely silent. Not even a breath of wind to rustle the now white leaves. If you've ever walked through snow on a calm night, you can kind of imagine it. I walked through the streets, looking around at the windows. I couldn't see anyone. I reached out to touch one of the parked cars along the road, then a tree. It all felt normal to me. The bark even chipped a little. The sky above me was the same blank white, only the outlines of the houses marked them out so I could tell the difference. I was more curious than scared, although now I put that down to a kid's innocence. I walked on, puzzled yet oddly fascinated by this strange version of my world. Then, as I rounded the corner at the end of my road by the local shop, I heard it. The only sound in the world that I wasn't making myself. It sounded far away, but since I'd never been in such perfect silence before I couldn't tell how far. It sounded like footsteps. As blunt and dull sounding as my own, but heavier. Like my dad's heavy work boots or something similar. It was a rhythmic plod, I could hear it clear as day. I could also make out heavy, labored breathing, as though whoever owned the footsteps was carrying something. I looked around but there was no sign of anyone on any of the streets around me. The most I could tell was that it sounded like it was coming from deeper into the city. Part of me felt I should try to call out, but a louder voice in my head told me I shouldn't announce myself to whoever it was. I must have made some kind of sound without thinking though, because the steps suddenly stopped. The silence was absolute. I didn't even dare to breathe. I could almost feel the owner of the steps listening for me. I was filled with a heavy dread, the kind that comes from some deep part of your brain that harks back to our earliest evolution and makes your stomach weigh a ton. Panic soon overtook me and I set off running back towards my house as quickly as I could. The key under the flower pot was still there, thankfully. I closed the door as quietly as I could, ran up to my room, closed my own door and hid under the covers, listening. I couldn't hear anything. The dread ebbed away slowly. I felt safe. After a few minutes, I drifted off to sleep. I woke up again and the world was back to normal. I figured it must have been a dream. The walls were back to being pink, my night dress too, and the sky outside the window was its usual blue. As it turned out, it wasn't that simple, as my dad later told me. He had checked on me around 1 a.m. when he and my mum went to bed, but I wasn't there. Neither he nor she could find me anywhere in the house or the garden. They called the police, then my brother who was at a bar in the city. The search went on all night, the whole suburb turned over. There was no sign of me. When I walked into the kitchen in the morning, my parents were in shock. It wasn't a warm night, there was no way I could have been out all night in a nightdress without suffering some exposure. That was my mother's reasoning. My father was certain I couldn't have made it out without them noticing. They checked me over and I was, for all intents and purposes, perfectly fine. I told them about the dream I'd had, about the white place. They were both at a loss to explain it, but thankfully they weren't dismissive either. Eventually we all agreed that I must have been sleepwalking, having found some previously unknown way out of the house. My grandmother had been a sleepwalker for much of her life, so it seemed like the most likely explanation. The police were satisfied with the explanation too. My dad spent the next week securing the house, making sure it couldn't happen again. Every window was bolted, every door double locked. It was Fort Knox after that. But it did happen again. It wouldn't be my last visit to the White Place. I'll share some of those experiences in future posts soon. Have any of you ever experienced anything like this? No one I've ever met has, even the ones who have open minds to this kind of thing. They're sympathetic but they can't relate. I also haven't a clue what the footsteps in the distance were about or why they stopped so suddenly. I'd love to hear any similar experiences you might have, maybe we can build a better idea of it together. I'll do my best to answer any questions. Elliot. Story 11, The Cottage, Entry 1. The shrink told me it would help to keep writing, even though I wanted so badly to stop. A journal, a diary, thoughts, something to piece it all together. Something to make sense of the mess. So I did it. Begrudgingly. Before then, writing wasn't a problem. In fact, I fancied making it a career ever since I could remember. And that's what I was trying to do. See, I've always enjoyed telling stories, but I'm not sure this helped, like pulling off a bandage too early and getting a nasty infection. Okay. So here it is. I wrote about my stay at a small cottage in rural Quebec. I have a notebook filled with entries, and I'm going to post them here, for you, word for word. It might make more sense to someone out there. I'm sure about what I saw and what happened. It haunts me. I find occasionally, with enough drinking, I'll string together a few sleeps without seeing it again, blank it out, but whenever I close my eyes to rest, her song comes back again, and again, and again. I only know one way to find peace. There's only one way out. Day 1. That first visit was in late September. The evening air was crisp and an old apple tree had started to wither against the bitter fall. As the sun set over the river, I leaned against an old shed I'd found waiting for me in the yard. I watched my breath dance around till it melted with the blue-black sky. I'd be on the road forever, and I would have killed for a smoke. It was a long, long drive, but it was over, and I'd promised my wife the smokes were history. A wolf howled something distant. The cottage's lot was huge, sprawling as far as I could see. I hauled some loose yard trash, chip wrappers and soda cans, to the bin, and I locked it. See, I'd been warned about Big Arsehole. The local black bear was a big arsehole as far as garbage eating was concerned. I locked it tight. The walkway back to the cottage was a long, twisted set of cracked stone and rock. Broken beer bottles were sprinkled along the edges near some overgrowth and shrubs. Neighbors or college kids, I figured. The key to the place was left under the welcome mat. Seemed secure enough. The oak door creaked magnificently. I stepped in and the wooden floorboards ached and moaned. The darkness had been creeping up on the house and I was almost swimming in a cloudy black. I'd been cursed with awful eyesight since I was a kid, and it was even worse at night, but I could make my way down the hall. I found my way to the kitchen table. The old wooden chair was surprisingly comfortable. I lit a wide candle, took out my notebook and pen, and got to work. The words seemed to pour out like a faucet. Words became sentences, sentences became paragraphs, paragraphs became pages. Brian. The telephone screamed. Brian. There's no other word for it, really. It was one of those archaic rotary phones that probably belonged in the 50s. It echoed through the kitchen. Brian. I didn't even know a phone line ran to the building. I stood up, stretched, and lifted the receiver to my ear. Hello? Hello, mister. I've been watching you. My heart skipped a beat. Who? There was laughter. Nothing menacing, mind you, more like a local with a few screws loose, maybe a few beers deep. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. It's me, buddy, it's Ted. Ted. Right. The guy I rented the place from. It was an Airbnb. He told me he was having a whole lot of trouble renting it. He had the listing up for a month before I found it. The reason people weren't renting was obvious. They probably looked at the photos once or twice and shat themselves in terror. I just wanted to make sure you made it in all right, said Ted, on account of you being my first renter, and all. It's a bit off the trail, eh? Yeah. No problem. All good, Ted. I found it. So you did. And what do you think? I didn't have much a chance to clean before, you know. And I don't got a missus to keep me in check, no more. I paused and looked around the kitchen. The sink faucet had been leaking for hours, and a puddle was growing on the floor. The fridge stunk like death and putrid milk. There were smears of dried red on the countertops, probably from a drunken hunt, or a fight. There was no electricity, save for the phone. Did phones even need electricity? It's perfect, I said, glancing at my notebook on the table. And that $32 a night, I can stay as long as I need? Yes sir, you got it, no problem. I'm a couple of clicks down the river if you need anything at all, or maybe you need to grab a drink. go out for a night, meet a few girls, or, alright, thanks Ted. Goodbye. Wait, 'member what I told you about Big Asshole? You don't want to visit, I'll tell you, he gets brave when he's hungry. One time, 3 or 4 years back, I could hear him digging, clawing away at the side of the shed, scraping, like he knew he wanted something in there, but, goodbye, Ted. I hung up the phone and massaged the back of my neck with my thumb, feeling the familiar cricks and cracks of getting old. I thought of my wife, and picked up the phone, but I just looked at the rotary dial, and hung up. I'd call her in the morning. I lit the wood fireplace an hour later and put my soon-to-be liquid inspiration on top. It was first ground fine and packed into a little aluminium chamber, then screwed into place above an agitated pot of water. The fire burned hotter, the water boiled, and the espresso cried out when it was done. I evened it out with an old bottle of whiskey I found under the sink. Living dangerously. The living room in the cottage was dank and musty, so the warm woody smell of fire was welcome. Behind the couch was a wide bay window, and a half-moon hung in the sky, dancing in and out of cloud cover. The room shimmered between long stretches of dark and sudden wisps of silver. There was a big framed art piece on the mantel, next to a bookcase filled with board games and old Playboys. It was a lifelike portrait of a white swan, swimming along the riverside, with little white swanlings circling behind. It was oddly beautiful. Ted, the art type. Life was full of surprises. My eyes had gotten heavy despite the caffeine. Maybe the booze was a mistake. My watch told me it was 1:22 a.m. I yawned and stretched and looked up to the hallway, where the old bedroom was. I stood up, took my glasses off, and massaged my eyes slowly, trying to work the day's thoughts into place. A ritual I had since I was a teenager. There was the sound of scratching out the yard. It was faint at first, like a cat and a scratching post, but a few rooms away it grew louder and faster and more ferocious. Something grunted and growled and snapped. I froze. My heart was beating fiercely. That goddamn black bear was on the hunt. I turned slowly to look out the window, but the moonlight had been hidden away by a patch of thick mist. I put my glasses back on and focused my eyes out at the old shed, a few dozen yards across the way. The blood that was pumping in my ears drowned out almost everything, but there was first a soft ringing, and that clawing, that gnashing, and then, something else. There was, unmistakably, a woman singing. It was soft, at first, and something completely foreign to my ears. It sounded ancient like a hymn. I strained against the windowsill to learn more. I could faintly see her outside, all in white, the moonlight bouncing off her silky dress. No, maybe it was more a sheet, with nothing underneath but bare, white flesh, hiding in the black wind. Her visage flickered in and out as the moon dipped between clouds. And, across from her, 10 feet, maybe 20, was the black bear. She looked at me. She looked into me. Her eyes were as brown as the oak trees. She had red tears dripping down her gaunt cheeks, the crimson a furious contrast to the silver everything. She raised her arms, and the sheet fell to the ground and blew away in the wind. Her mouth was a black slit, straight across horizontal like a bridge. Her lips, if she had them, didn't move, didn't flinch, but that hymn echoed from her being and out into the night. I noticed the scratching and snarling had stopped. The creature was dazed. Slowly, it sat on its hind legs and looked up at the night sky, almost like a circus bear, performing for a crowd. The dark had engulfed the yard, and quite suddenly, I felt exposed. The hairs on my neck were shocked in place. My stomach twisted and churned. I crouched, hiding on the underside of the window frame, eyes just above level, trying desperately to make sense of what I just saw. But when the cloud cover disappeared, and the soft pearl moon shone through, the creature, and the woman, were gone.